The mahogany desk between us felt like a chasm. Warren Kelly, our CEO, sat perfectly composed in his leather chair, fingers steepled as he studied me with calculated concern. The severance agreement lay on the polished surface between us, crisp and final. "Amanda, I understand you're upset," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "But escalating this complaint will destroy your career. Not just here, everywhere. Technology is a small world. Reputations matter." My hands were shaking in my lap. I'd come to his office expecting support, maybe even outrage on my behalf. Instead, I was getting managed, manipulated, and quietly threatened. "What happened to me was assault," I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. "Kyle Harrison assaulted me. That's not a workplace disagreement or a misunderstanding." Warren's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. One that could ruin an executive's career based solely on your interpretation of events. The company has to consider all perspectives. The settlement offers you dignity, privacy, and a generous financial cushion. Sign it, and we all move forward." His tone made it clear: sign or face consequences. Protect the company, protect Kyle, or pay the price. I stared at the document, my signature line waiting. Then I stood up. "No." Warren's face hardened instantly. 8 months earlier, I'd walked into Nexus Technologies feeling like I'd won the lottery. At 29, landing a senior product manager role at a company reshaping digital infrastructure was a dream. The office gleamed with modern design, the team buzzed with innovation, and my boss, Kyle Harrison, was a legend in the industry. Kyle was VP of Product Development, charming and brilliant. He'd built 3 successful platforms and had a reputation for mentoring rising talent. During my interview, he'd talked passionately about creating opportunities for young professionals. I'd left feeling inspired. The first 3 months were exactly what I'd hoped for. Kyle gave me challenging projects, included me in strategic meetings, and publicly praised my work. He seemed genuinely invested in my success. Then the boundaries started blurring. Extra coffee meetings that felt less professional. Comments about my appearance disguised as compliments. Late-night messages about work that shifted into personal questions. Small things, easily rationalized. He was just being friendly. Building rapport. Mentoring. I told myself I was overthinking it. Kyle had a wife, 2 kids, a stellar reputation. I was the new person, probably misreading friendly for something else. Then came the client dinner in Boston. The conference had gone well. Our product demo impressed potential investors, and Kyle suggested celebrating with dinner. 4 of us initially, Kyle, myself, and 2 colleagues, but the others canceled last minute. Just Kyle and me remained. Dinner was fine. Professional. We discussed project timelines and expansion strategies. I relaxed, grateful my earlier discomfort had been misplaced paranoia. Then Kyle suggested a nightcap at the hotel bar. 1 drink became 2. He moved closer, his hand occasionally touching my arm. Warning bells rang, but we were in public. Nothing could happen in a crowded hotel bar. "You're incredibly talented, Amanda," he said, his voice low. "I see real potential in you. We should discuss your advancement privately." He suggested continuing the conversation in his suite. "Just for a few minutes. I have some documents about the VP track I want to show you." Every instinct screamed no. But he was my boss. A respected executive. Maybe I was being paranoid again. Maybe this really was about my career. I went to his suite. The door closed behind me. There were no documents. What happened next was brief, horrifying, and unmistakable. When I finally left his room, my hands were shaking and my mind was blank with shock. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed every moment, questioning myself, wondering what I'd done wrong. Should I have refused the nightcap? Left the bar earlier? Been clearer about boundaries I didn't realize I needed to state? By morning, I'd convinced myself to stay quiet. Reporting it would mean explaining why I'd gone to his room. People would ask questions I couldn't answer without sounding naive or complicit. Kyle would deny everything. It would be my word against his. But the silence felt like poison. Every time I saw him in the office, smiling and untouchable, something inside me hardened. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. 2 weeks later, I sent an email to HR: professional, factual, careful. I need to report an incident involving inappropriate conduct by Kyle Harrison during the Boston conference. I'd like to schedule a confidential meeting to discuss. The response came from Veronica Nash, HR director. Warm, reassuring, scheduled for the following week. We take all concerns seriously. Let's find a time that works for you. That phrase, concerns, should have been my first warning. Not complaints or allegations. Concerns. Soft language for something that wasn't soft at all. The morning of my scheduled meeting, Veronica's assistant called to reschedule. Something urgent came up. How's next Thursday? Next Thursday became the following Tuesday. I started to understand the delay wasn't accidental. Before I ever sat down with HR, my direct supervisor pulled me aside. Natalie Cooper was someone I'd trusted, a woman who'd navigated corporate politics successfully. I thought she'd be an ally. Amanda, she said quietly, closing her office door. I heard you filed a complaint about Kyle. That's your right, of course. But I need to tell you, leadership is not happy. They feel you should have handled this internally before involving HR. My stomach dropped. Internally? He's the VP of Product Development. Who exactly should I have talked to? Natalie looked uncomfortable. I'm just saying, escalating this has created problems. People are upset you didn't come to them first, that you went straight to formal channels. It looks adversarial. The message was clear: I'd broken an unwritten rule. I'd prioritized my safety over corporate comfort. Leadership had already decided I was the problem. When did leadership find out? I asked carefully. Warren was briefed yesterday. He wanted to understand the situation before HR proceeded. The CEO knew. Before any investigation. Before I'd even given my statement. They'd already chosen which side to protect. That afternoon, my calendar pinged with a new meeting request: executive discussion, Warren Kelly's office, Friday 3 p.m. 3 days away. 3 days to worry about what awaited me there. Friday arrived too quickly. I sat across from Warren in his executive suite, the city skyline sprawling behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything about the room projected power, permanence, control. He started with sympathy. These situations are always difficult. Workplace dynamics can be complicated, especially between ambitious people. Sometimes intentions get misread. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I said firmly. Kyle assaulted me in his hotel suite. I didn't misread anything. Warren's expression shifted subtly. That's a very serious allegation. Memory can be unreliable, especially after emotional events. Were you drinking that evening? The implication was clear. My credibility was being challenged before any investigation even started. Kyle invited me to his suite under false pretenses, I continued. He used his position of authority too. He says you pursued a relationship with him, Warren interrupted smoothly. That you initiated contact outside work hours, sought private meetings, and misinterpreted his professional mentorship as romantic interest. When he rejected you, you became vindictive. The lie was so perfectly constructed I almost laughed. Almost. Warren slid the severance agreement forward. This protects everyone. You leave with compensation and references. Kyle's reputation remains intact. The company avoids distraction. Everyone wins. Accept justice. Accept truth. Accept me. I refused to sign. Warren's earlier warmth evaporated, replaced by cold professionalism. The meeting ended with vague pleasantries and specific threats disguised as concern. Within days, subtle punishments began. My access to certain systems was restricted without explanation. Project meetings I'd previously led were suddenly handled by others. Emails I sent to cross-functional teams went unanswered, as if I'd become invisible. Nothing was explicit enough to document as retaliation. Just death by 1,000 small exclusions. Kyle remained visible and confident, attending executive presentations and client meetings as always. Nobody mentioned Boston. Nobody mentioned investigations. The company simply erased the incident by pretending it hadn't happened. My annual performance review, originally scheduled for June, was suddenly moved up to April. Natalie delivered the news apologetically. Leadership wants to check in on your trajectory sooner. Just routine. Nothing about this was routine. They were building a file, documenting problems that would justify my eventual removal. Coworkers who'd been friendly grew distant. Someone had clearly spread a narrative, though nobody said it directly to my face. I felt isolated, doubted, and increasingly desperate. That night, I started keeping detailed notes of everything: dates, times, conversations, who said what and when. The documentation became my anchor. Every morning, I reviewed what had happened and added new observations. Email timestamps, meeting cancellations, changes in my access permissions. I wrote down exact quotes from conversations, noting tone and context. When Veronica finally scheduled my formal HR interview, I brought printed copies of my timeline. She seemed surprised by my preparation. "Walk me through the events in Boston," she said, pen poised over her notepad. I did. Factually, chronologically, without emotion. When I finished, Veronica nodded sympathetically. "This must have been very difficult for you. We'll need to investigate thoroughly, which takes time. Meanwhile, try to maintain normal working relationships." Normal. As if assault could be compartmentalized like a disagreement about project deadlines. 2 weeks later, I requested an update. Veronica said the investigation was ongoing. Another week passed. Same response. I checked my original email to HR, the one that had started this process. The timestamp showed I'd sent it March 3rd. It was now May 15th. Over 2 months with no resolution, no interviews with witnesses, no apparent progress. Then I noticed something odd. An email I'd sent Veronica outlining specific details had been forwarded to Warren's office. The subject line had been subtly changed from formal complaint details to employee concern discussion. Language mattered. Complaints triggered legal obligations. Concerns were softer, manageable. During my next meeting with Veronica, I referenced an earlier conversation where she'd promised weekly updates. She looked confused. "I don't recall promising weekly updates, Amanda." Our initial meeting was about setting expectations, not timelines. I pulled out my notes, dated and timestamped. March 18th, 10:30 a.m., your office. You said, and I quote, "I'll provide updates every Friday so you know the investigation is progressing." Her expression flickered. The notes changed everything. Without documentation, it was my memory against hers. With documentation, my credibility was suddenly undeniable. "I'll need to review my records," she said carefully. Sometimes communications get misunderstood. But the damage was done. She realized I wasn't just emotional, I was prepared. 3 days later, I received an email from Warren's office. "The matter has been escalated to executive leadership for review. You'll be contacted shortly regarding next steps." Escalated upward. Which meant Warren was now personally involved in managing my complaint against his VP. The fox wasn't just guarding the henhouse. He was deciding which hens deserved protection. The settlement offer came 2 weeks later. Larger than the first one, more carefully worded. Veronica presented it during what she called a resolution meeting. "The investigation hasn't substantiated your allegations," she began, her tone practiced. However, the company recognizes this has been stressful for you. We'd like to offer a mutual separation agreement with favorable terms. 6 months salary. Extended healthcare. Neutral references. Confidentiality clause preventing me from discussing internal company matters with anyone, ever. What about Kyle? I asked. What consequences does he face? Veronica's pause told me everything. Personnel matters are confidential. But I can assure you that all parties have been counseled about professional conduct. Counseled. Not disciplined. Not suspended. Not even formally reprimanded. Kyle would continue his career untouched while I was paid to disappear. This isn't about finding truth, I said quietly. This is about protecting him. This is about allowing everyone to move forward, Veronica corrected. Prolonging this helps no one. Sign the agreement, Amanda. It's the best outcome you'll get. I looked at the document, at the signature line that would erase my voice permanently. Then I stood up. No. I'm not signing. Veronica's professionalism cracked slightly. You're making a mistake. This offer won't come again. I walked out, knowing I'd just sealed my fate at Nexus Technologies. The isolation intensified. My entire team was reassigned to a different project lead. My office was relocated to a temporary workspace on a different floor, away from everyone I'd worked with. The message was clear: cooperate or be erased. I spent days in that isolated office, given busy work that a junior analyst could handle. Projects I'd led for months continued without me. Nobody explained the changes. Nobody acknowledged the obvious retaliation. Then my personal email pinged with a message from an unknown address. I worked at Nexus 2 years ago. I need to talk to you about Kyle Harrison. Her name was Caroline Foster. We met at a coffee shop 30 minutes from the office. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. Kyle did the same thing to me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Conference in Seattle. Drinks, his hotel suite, everything. I reported it to HR. They buried it. My blood went cold. What happened to you? Settlement agreement. They paid me $70,000 to go away and never speak about it. I signed because I was terrified and broke. But I've regretted it every day since. This wasn't damage control. This was a pattern. A system designed to protect Kyle while silencing victims with money and legal threats. Did Warren know? I asked. Caroline nodded. He personally delivered my settlement offer. Told me I was making it harder than it needed to be. Caroline's story was almost identical to mine. The mentorship that became inappropriate attention. The professional setting that shifted into something predatory. The HR process that prioritized the company's reputation over truth. There might be others, she said. Kyle's been at Nexus for 8 years. If he did this to us, he's done it to others. The pattern revealed something worse than individual misconduct. This was institutional. HR wasn't failing to investigate, they were actively managing this situation to protect the company's interests. I kept copies of everything, Caroline admitted. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't let it all just disappear. If you're still fighting this, I can help. She gave me a USB drive containing her original complaint, email chains with HR, and the settlement agreement she'd signed. The documents showed Warren's direct involvement in suppressing her case, including emails where he instructed HR to resolve this quietly without formal findings. I realized Warren's interference had already violated protocol. CEOs shouldn't personally manage harassment complaints, that's what HR and legal were for. His involvement suggested he was protecting Kyle specifically, not just the company generally. That night, I researched employment law and whistleblower protections. What I found changed everything. Monday morning, Warren sent me an email. Subject line, moving forward. Amanda, I've been reflecting on our conversations and want to encourage you to reconsider your position. Escalating this complaint further won't change the outcome, it will only damage your professional reputation and future opportunities. I'm asking you, for your own benefit, to accept the resolution we've offered. This is my final attempt to help you avoid a very difficult path. The email was perfectly crafted. Concerned, reasonable, subtly threatening. But it was also evidence. A CEO directly pressuring an employee to withdraw a harassment complaint violated multiple employment regulations. His encouragement crossed from management discretion into illegal interference. He'd just documented his own misconduct. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then replied professionally, "Thank you for your concern. I'll consider all options carefully." That afternoon, I contacted an employment attorney. Her name was Diane Kaufman, recommended by Caroline's lawyer. I sent her everything, my timeline, Caroline's files, Warren's email, the settlement offers, documentation of retaliation. Diane called me that evening. "Amanda, this is substantial. Warren's involvement alone triggers regulatory review. Combined with the pattern Caroline established, you have grounds for external investigation." What does that mean? It means this isn't just an internal HR matter anymore. Federal employment regulations require certain complaints to be handled appropriately. When executives interfere to suppress them, outside authorities can get involved. Diane's advice was clear: document everything, stay professional, don't warn anyone about potential external action. Let them continue thinking they controlled the narrative while we built an ironclad case. I returned to work the next day and acted like nothing had changed. I accepted my diminished role without complaint. I responded politely to emails. I attended the few meetings I was still included in and contributed professionally. Leadership relaxed. They'd worn me down, or so they thought. The troublesome employee was finally accepting reality. Meanwhile, I continued documenting every instance of retaliation. The project I was removed from launched successfully without my name mentioned anywhere in the announcement, despite my leading its development for 6 months. My performance review arrived with suddenly critical assessments of work that had been praised weeks earlier. My access to client databases was revoked pending security updates that never seemed to complete. Diane filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on my behalf. The process was confidential. Nexus wouldn't be notified until investigators decided whether to pursue the case. "Don't get your hopes up," Diane warned. EEOC investigations can take months and many don't result in action. But Warren's interference and the pattern with Caroline give us legitimate grounds. I waited. And documented. And pretended everything was fine while my career at Nexus slowly suffocated. The termination notice arrived via email on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Organizational restructuring. Due to strategic realignment of our product division, we're eliminating several positions, including yours. Your last day will be Friday. You'll receive 2 weeks severance and benefits continuation through the end of the month. We appreciate your contributions to Nexus Technologies. Clinical. Efficient. Perfectly legal sounding. They'd built enough documentation of my supposed performance issues to justify the termination. On paper, this looked like routine restructuring, not retaliation for reporting assault. I sat in my isolated office, staring at the email, feeling everything I'd fought for crumble. They'd won. Kyle remained untouched. Warren had successfully managed the problem. I'd lost my job, my reputation, and accomplished nothing. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. EEOC accepted the case. Federal investigation opening. Don't resign. Don't sign anything. Terminating you now was a massive mistake on their part. I read the message 3 times before it sank in. They'd fired me during an active federal investigation into retaliation. The timing would be impossible to explain away. Warren thought he'd ended this. Instead, he'd just given investigators everything they needed to prove his interference. Diane explained the implications quickly. The moment Warren personally intervened in your harassment complaint, he triggered federal oversight obligations. Companies can't let executives suppress these cases. That's exactly what employment law prevents. Your termination during an active EEOC review makes the retaliation undeniable. The investigation would examine everything. Warren's emails, HR's handling of my complaint, Caroline's settlement, Kyle's history, and the convenient timing of my dismissal. They probably don't even know the EEOC is involved yet, Diane continued. You weren't required to tell them. But when investigators show up, they won't have prepared defenses. Federal jurisdiction meant this was beyond Nexus's control. They couldn't settle it away, couldn't manage the narrative, couldn't decide what got investigated. Warren had spent months trying to protect Kyle and himself, never realizing his interference had activated the exact oversight he was trying to avoid. What happens now? I asked. You wait. Don't contact anyone at Nexus. Don't discuss this with former colleagues. Let the investigation proceed. EEOC will request documents, interview witnesses, and examine the pattern. Your job is to stay quiet and let them work. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear or anger. I felt hope. Not for my job back, I never wanted to return to Nexus. But hope that truth might actually matter. Nexus continued operating normally, unaware of what was coming. I monitored their social media and press releases from a distance. Warren hosted a quarterly earnings call, projecting confidence about their growth trajectory. Kyle spoke at an industry conference, his session titled Ethical Leadership in Tech. The irony was almost unbearable. 2 weeks after my termination, I received a final paycheck and COBRA insurance paperwork. Everything processed cleanly, as if I'd simply been part of routine restructuring. My exit was bureaucratically perfect, which made the underlying retaliation easier to prove. Diane received the first formal notice that EEOC was proceeding with a full investigation. Nexus would be contacted shortly to preserve all relevant records and make leadership available for interviews. They'll probably hear about it within the next week, Diane said. Once they do, expect panic. Companies hate EEOC investigations, they're thorough, public, and expensive. I wasn't allowed to participate directly. My role was done. I provided my testimony, my documentation, and my evidence. Now federal investigators would follow the trail I'd laid. Waiting was torture. Days felt like weeks. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, expecting news that never came. Doubt crept in during sleepless nights. What if they found loopholes? What if Warren's lawyers made this disappear too? Then, 3 weeks after my termination, I noticed something odd on LinkedIn. Nexus's general counsel had quietly changed his profile, removing his current position and listing himself as available for opportunities. People don't leave suddenly unless something forces them out. The waiting stretched into June. I applied for new jobs, went through interviews, and tried to rebuild routine while everything felt suspended. Every night I checked my email obsessively, looking for updates from Diane. Doubt became constant companion. Maybe the investigation stalled. Maybe Warren's connections protected him. Maybe Caroline and I weren't enough to prove a pattern. Then small signs started appearing. Nexus's CFO canceled a planned speaking engagement at a major conference. Their quarterly board meeting, normally listed on their corporate calendar, disappeared from public view. Warren's Twitter account went silent mid-month after years of daily posts about innovation and leadership. Something was happening behind their corporate walls. I just couldn't see it. These investigations move slowly, Diane reminded me during a check-in call. Investigators are thorough. They interview people separately, cross-reference documents, build timelines. Silence means they're working, not that they've abandoned it. On June 23, exactly 2 months after my termination, I drove past Nexus's headquarters on my way to a job interview. The parking lot looked normal, typical Tuesday morning with employees arriving for work. Then I saw the unmarked sedans pulling into the executive parking area. 4 of them, government plane. Professional-looking people with badges and briefcases heading toward the main entrance. My hand started shaking on the steering wheel. I pulled into a nearby lot and watched from a distance as the group walked past reception, headed straight for the elevators, and disappeared upward toward Warren's executive suite. I texted Diane immediately, "People just arrived at Nexus. Multiple cars. Looked official." Her response came quickly, "Don't go near the building. Let it happen. I'll call when I know more." I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, unable to drive away. Through the building's glass exterior, I could see unusual movement on the executive floors. People gathering in conference rooms. Security blocking certain corridors. The kind of controlled chaos that suggested something significant was happening. Around 11 a.m., employees started emerging for early lunches, clustering in confused groups. Word was spreading internally, though I couldn't hear what they were saying. My phone rang. Diane's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear satisfaction underneath. EEOC investigators are on site conducting interviews. They arrived unannounced this morning with document preservation orders. Nexus leadership is being separated and questioned individually. Warren? He was in a strategy meeting when they arrived. Walked him straight out and into a private room. Kyle Harrison too. They're both being interviewed right now. The power dynamic I'd experienced for months. Warren's authority, Kyle's protection, my helplessness, was inverting in real time. The same executive suite where Warren had threatened my career was now occupied by investigators with legal authority he couldn't dismiss or manage. What happens now? I asked. They'll interview witnesses, review documents, and build their case. You'll probably be contacted for follow-up questions. Just answer honestly and stick to facts. Details emerged slowly over the following days. Diane's contacts confirmed that investigators had separated all executives and senior HR staff into different conference rooms, preventing them from coordinating their stories. They'd collected phones, laptops, and access credentials immediately upon arrival. The entire executive floor had been effectively locked down for 9 hours. Employees weren't allowed up. Meetings were cancelled. Everything stopped while investigators methodically interviewed people and preserved evidence. Warren's calm authority, which had felt so absolute in his office months ago, meant nothing against federal investigators with legal mandates. He couldn't threaten their careers or pay them to be quiet. He could only answer their questions while his carefully constructed narrative fell apart. Kyle's interview reportedly lasted over 4 hours. Investigators had Caroline's settlement agreement, my complaint, and several other women who'd come forward after learning about the investigation. The pattern was undeniable. On the 3rd day after the investigators arrived, I received an email requesting my availability for a formal interview. EEOC investigation, Nexus Technologies. Please contact our office to schedule your testimony. Diane prepared me carefully. They'll ask detailed questions about your complaint, Warren's interference, the retaliation you experienced, and the events in Boston. Be honest, be specific, and don't minimize anything. This is your chance to be heard by people who actually have authority to act. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Federal Building downtown. Official, formal, real. The EEOC office was nothing like Nexus's sleek corporate headquarters. Just functional government space with worn furniture and fluorescent lighting. But the investigators who greeted me, Senior Investigator Tracy Mendez and her colleague Alan Brooks, radiated competence and authority. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for coming in. We've reviewed your complaint and supporting documentation. We'd like to walk through the timeline in detail, starting with the Boston conference. For the first time since March, I told my story to people who weren't trying to manage it, minimize it, or make it disappear. They asked clarifying questions without judgment. They took detailed notes. They listened. When I described Warren's threats in his office, Tracy stopped me. He specifically said reporting the assault would end your career? Yes. And that technology is a small world. That reputation matters. The implication was clear: cross him and I'd never work in this industry again. Tracy exchanged glances with Alan. That's a direct retaliation threat. Combined with his documented involvement in suppressing your complaint, that establishes a pattern of interference. By the time I finished describing my termination, I was crying. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. After months of being doubted, dismissed, and gaslit, someone finally believed me without qualification. Ms. Whitmore, Tracy said gently, your documentation was extraordinarily thorough. It corroborated everything. We've also identified 3 additional complaints against Kyle Harrison that were similarly suppressed. Your case broke this open. The investigation's impact rippled through Nexus faster than leadership could control. Within days, news leaked internally that federal investigators were examining executive conduct. Kyle Harrison was placed on immediate administrative leave. Warren stopped attending public meetings. The company's PR team went into crisis mode. Former employees started reaching out on LinkedIn, asking if I knew what was happening. I couldn't respond, Diane advised complete silence, but the messages revealed how widespread the rumors had become. Industry publications picked up the story. Nexus Technologies under federal investigation for workplace conduct. Details were vague, but the implication was clear: something serious was happening behind their corporate walls. Current employees began updating their LinkedIn profiles and reaching out to recruiters. The company's Glassdoor rating dropped precipitously as anonymous reviews detailed toxic culture and retaliation against complainants. The house of cards Warren had built through intimidation and settlements was collapsing. Nexus's board scheduled an emergency meeting. Their corporate calendar, briefly visible before someone made it private, showed executive leadership review, closed session. Diane called with an update. EEOC has concluded their fact-finding. They've determined your complaint was substantiated, the retaliation was illegal, and Warren's interference violated federal employment regulations. They're preparing formal findings. What does that mean for Warren and Kyle? The board is being advised to take immediate action. If they don't, EEOC can pursue it independently. Either way, there will be consequences. The announcement came via press release on a Thursday morning. Professional, clinical, devastating. Effective immediately, Warren Kelly has been removed as CEO of Nexus Technologies. The board of directors has accepted his resignation following an internal review of executive conduct. Interim CEO Patricia Sloan will lead the company during this transition. We remain committed to maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct and workplace safety. No details. No acknowledgement of what triggered his removal. Just the bare fact of his departure, carefully worded to limit liability while confirming consequences. Kyle Harrison's termination was announced separately, equally clinical. Following a comprehensive review of workplace conduct policies, Kyle Harrison's employment has been terminated. We are committed to fostering a safe, respectful work environment for all employees. The executives who'd spent months protecting themselves, managing my complaint, and threatening my career were gone. Not because they'd developed consciences or learned from mistakes, but because federal investigators had forced accountability they couldn't suppress or settle. 2 days after Warren's removal, I received an email from Patricia Sloan. Ms. Whitmore, I would like to speak with you about your experience at Nexus and discuss potential paths forward. Please contact my office at your convenience. They wanted to talk about reinstatement. About making this right. About moving forward. But I'd already moved on. I met with Patricia and Nexus's new general counsel in a neutral location, not their headquarters. They were professional, apologetic, and clearly coached by attorneys about what they could and couldn't say. We deeply regret how your complaint was handled, Patricia began. The previous leadership's actions don't reflect Nexus's values. We'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay, restored seniority, and a formal apology acknowledging the retaliation you experienced. It was a genuine offer. Fair compensation, public acknowledgement, everything I might have wanted 6 months ago. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But I can't return to a company where this was allowed to happen. Where multiple women were silenced before someone finally listened. Patricia nodded. I understand. What would feel right to you? We negotiated for 3 hours. I'd leave permanently with a comprehensive settlement that included substantial compensation, protected employment record, and unrestricted references. They'd implement mandatory anti-retaliation training, establish independent reporting mechanisms for harassment complaints, and create an oversight board to monitor executive conduct. Most importantly, no gag order. No forced silence about what happened. I could speak about my experience if I chose to. This isn't about punishing Nexus, I explained. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to someone else. We signed the agreement that afternoon. I walked away with dignity, compensation, and the knowledge that I'd forced real change. 4 months later, I started a new position at a competitor, where my experience was respected and my voice valued. The transition wasn't easy. Trauma doesn't disappear because you've won. But I'd survived something designed to break me, and that survival felt like its own kind of victory. Caroline reached out occasionally, processing her own complicated feelings about Nexus's collapse. Other women who'd been silenced by settlements quietly thanked me for forcing accountability. The pattern we'd revealed led to additional investigations at other companies where Kyle had previously worked. Warren Kelly disappeared from the tech industry entirely. Kyle's LinkedIn profile was deleted. Both men faced the professional consequences they'd spent years evading. I thought about what Diane had told me early in this process: justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, and happens through proper channels. I hadn't gone viral or made headlines. I'd simply documented everything, followed legal processes, and refused to be silenced. The system worked, but only because I'd forced it to. Because I'd kept evidence when they tried to erase it. Because I'd found allies like Caroline and Diane who'd helped me navigate impossible terrain. Because I'd understood that silence protects abusers while truth, properly documented and legally pursued, could create real accountability. I didn't exploit my trauma for attention. I honored it by demanding justice through every proper channel until someone finally listened. That felt like enough.